talking about the importance of right speech this morning. This is such a valuable, I think I'd like to say a valuable introduction to the whole subject of speech and communication and the effect our speech and communication has upon others. I think you're going to be surprised with the information I share this morning. I'm going to start with a compilation of quotes from the Tibetan Djwhal Khul. A number of years ago, maybe 30 years ago, it's been quite a while, I was studying a compilation of the Tibetan's material from a book called Ponder on This. And in that book, he talked about how disciples and initiates must become more increasingly aware of their speech, of their communication. And as you'll learn later on in the talk this morning, one of the key factors about speech is if we do not refine our vehicles, if we do not refine our speech, we cannot take spiritual initiations. Does that surprise you? It did me. I thought we could get away with a lot more than apparently we can't get away with. I'll also be talking this morning about speech as energy, about positive and negative speech and how that relates or doesn't relate to initiation. I have a couple of wonderful little stories to share, parables, if you will, from the Tibetan teaching. And then I'm going to just share a little insight about high-level communications, how they can sublimate, how high-level communication can sublimate our lower nature. And then I'll wrap up the talk this morning talking a little bit about negative speech and how it harms the solemnity of one's temple or ashram. One of the themes from Ponder on This was about the importance of disciples practicing right speech. He said, the Tibetan said, one of the greatest instruments for practical development lying in the hands of small and great is the instrument of speech. He who guards his words and who only speaks with altruistic purpose in order to carry the energy of love through the medium of the tongue is one who is mastering rapidly the initial steps to be taken in preparation for initiation. Speech is the most occult manifestation in existence, he wrote. He said, it is the means of creation and the vehicle of force. He wrote that the disciple who seeks to enter within the portal of initiation cannot do so until he has learned the power of speech and the power of silence. As a musician, what that meant to me, I was thinking about different composers and the power of their music and how oftentimes the power of their music was within the rest, the actual rest, a poignant rest where all of the musicians and instruments are fervently playing and the trumpets and the drums are, obviously very noticeable in their loudness, and then all of a sudden everything comes to a stop, and all there is silence before we move on. So I just wanted to share that little thought with you to understand the power of silence. Also, meditation. When you advance your consciousness into the more advancing stages of meditation, your consciousness takes you into the silence. And of course, silence is where we become impressed by higher contacts. Typically, we don't know how to still our mind. Even this morning's meditation, telling us to still our mental plane for a minute. Were you able to do it even for 2 or 3 seconds? But with exercise and practice and allowing the focus of your consciousness to every day go through advancing stages of meditation, eventually you become more comfortable moving into that silence. The reason being is that you receive impression from higher contact and no longer have to rely on your concrete mind and your theoretical knowledge. Then the Tibetan says, until a person comprehends the significance of the spoken word, and until he utilizes the silence of the high places for the bringing about of desired effects on one plane or another, he cannot be admitted into those realities wherein every sound and every word spoken produces powerful results. The greater the progress that is made along the path of approach to the mysteries, the greater the care that must be taken by the aspirant with speech. Also, think about this. It's not always just the words that we speak, but how we speak them. What is the motive? What is the intent underlying what we say? As a trained musician, what I listen to is the quality of the voice that's speaking the word. How does it come across? Is it melodious? Is it out of balance? Is it discordant? Does the person smile when they're saying something ugly? I'm sorry, are they smiling when in essence the meaning behind what they're saying is very ugly? Like, I love you, I really hate you. So keep that in mind, that we can't get away with just saying polite conversation or making polite conversation. It needs to be real and authentic and charged with the fire of our spirit. Now, the Tibetan goes a little further, and he says there are 3 reasons that we must be very careful with what we say. The first is this. He says, owing to your stage in evolution, you will be able to enforce your words in a manner that may surprise you, meaning the effect that your words have on others may surprise you. If you could but see on the mental plane, then you will know the effect your words have on others. He builds more accurately. The disciple or the aspirant, he says, builds more accurately than the average person. His subsequent thought form is more strongly vitalized. So the point is that if you have an advancing consciousness, if you are a meditator, if you are charging your thought forms before you manifest the idea through words, then the greater the impact that word has upon the receiving person, on their psyche. So, let's say you're on the spiritual path, you've been studying, you've been meditating, you've been engaging in service for years and years. It also means you must take responsibility over what you say. because there's more fire behind your words than the average person, which means your impact can either be more loving, more inspiring, more healing, or just the opposite, more destructive, and so forth. So we have to take responsibility for what we say. We cannot say, I can't help it. Number 2, he says, any word spoken and consequent thought form built is apt to cause a barrier of mental substance between the person and his or her goal. I think of the stories that we've all probably heard. A student is in high school and wants to go to college, doesn't know where to go to college, isn't really sure what to major in. So they go into the school counselor. And the school counselor says, you don't have what it takes to go to college. You're never going to amount to anything. And that student does not go to college, accepts mediocre jobs. And in this one case, there was the student that had that experience, it was all grown up, had mediocre work, mediocre income, was just an average person, he thought, because he was told he was never going to amount to anything by that high school counselor. Well, there was a job opening, and he thought, wow, I'd really like to apply for that job, but I'm probably not worthy. So he thought, I have nothing to lose. So not only did he successfully pass the test, when he was interviewed by the president of the corporation, the president said, we've never had anyone take a test with such high results in this corporation than yourself. What are you doing in this lowly, menial position in this corporation? The influence, and this is a mental barrier between what someone told him and what his goals could have been. This separating wall has to be dissipated before further advancement can be made. Number 3, the Tibetan wrote, speech is very largely a mode of communication on the physical levels, but intuitive perception and telepathic interplay will distinguish the interaction between aspirants and disciples. So this is telling us, if you believe that your consciousness is refined to a degree where you have intuitive perception and you have an understanding of telepathy, your communication with your co-workers, who is presumably are aspirants and disciples, will be more intuitive, more telepathic than the spoken word. On being a good presenter of the teaching, he instructed this: every good speaker is doing a most occult work. A good lecturer, for example, is one who is doing work that is analogous on smaller scale to that done by the solar logos. That's a profound statement. What did he do? He thought, he built, and then what he built, he vitalized. He thought, he built, he vitalized. The lecturer, therefore, divides the material with which he is going to build his lecture. So he brings all the information together, he writes it on his computer. Then he has to vitalize what he is going to say. So every single word, which is from a thought form or an idea, then must be vitalized. And that's what it means to be a presenter or a lecturer of the Ageless Wisdom teaching. So once he constructs his lecture, he puts his spirit, his vitality, and force into it so that it is a vibrant, living manifestation. On a very practical level, he wrote, in physical plane manifestation, we are known by our speech. We are known by our reticence. We are known by the things we say and by the things we leave unsaid. We are judged, in other words, by the quality of our conversation. We think of people in terms of what they say, don't we? I can still think of and feel in my bones when I was at the university and I had one particular violin instructor, a professor who's a great musician. I can still hear his voice. I can still hear what he taught me about interpretation of music and sound and rhythm. I can still hear him. And he was a soft-spoken man. He wasn't loud and boisterous. I can still remember the words he told me of how to behave in college, which I really needed to hear because I was having a great old time. And other people like that, not so positive. So we think of people in terms of what they say because their words disclose the type of thought matter in which they work and the quality of energy or life which they put behind their words. So some people are hypocrites. They say, do this, but they don't do that. And pretty soon, we no longer listen to them. Now he instructs us with 3 practical steps to exercise. He says first, test out your ability to keep silent until it is no longer necessary to do so. Test out your ability to keep silent until it is no longer necessary to do so. Excuse me. Silence, he says, is one of the prime prerequisites for initiation, and something which every disciple must inevitably learn. You will be sorely tested. If you have a good teacher, that teacher will test you over and over and over again until you finally realize you have not yet begun to learn the value of silence. Now remember a few minutes ago when I said eventually through advancing meditation, when you move into the silence, you receive higher impression. But if you are so busy defending yourself, justifying yourself, accounting for why you were wrong, right, and why the teacher is wrong, you'll never receive higher impression. When the teacher speaks to us, the teacher is speaking physically, emotionally, mentally, it's spiritual, all those levels. And if the teacher is advanced enough, will also be dialoguing with your soul. While all the while you may be just expressing physical speech. Learning nothing. Number 2, learn to know when to speak and when to be silent. Remembering that the elimination of self-reference, remembering the elimination of self-reference will reduce speech to its spiritual essential. I'm pausing so it'll sink in. Okay. Number 3. This is the last instruction. He says speech and understanding when to be silent are related to the conditions of our vehicles, to their state of refinement, and to the degree of mastery of the inner dweller. If you don't understand what the inner dweller is, send me an email and we can talk about it, because I don't have time this morning. But we have to have a degree of mastery over the inner dweller. Throughout the teachings, we are frequently reminded, and in various ways, that we cannot refine our vehicles unless we exercise right speech. It's a very powerful statement. So this is a subject that is important to ponder, to realize that our spiritual progress and our speech are closely related to each other. In other words, our speech reflects our achievement. As we progress, we gain more mastery over our tongue. The first thing you must know is that when you speak, you are channeling energy. So now I'm moving from the introduction of the Tibetan's words. Now we're talking about energy and speech. You may channel etheric energy through your words or speech. This is getting a little technical, so listen carefully. You may channel etheric energy through your words or speech, or you may channel emotional energy or mental energy. You may even channel intuitional energy or still higher energy when you speak. If your consciousness is focused on higher planes, your speech will carry high-level substance to your audience. I'm going to interrupt myself here for a moment, because some of you that are on the webinar this morning and some of you here do present lectures on the teaching. Sometimes you feel it is necessary to interpret the words of a teacher, to interpret the master's words. I have no problem with that unless you are reducing the high-level energy that went into the master's words. Sometimes a new presenter will assume that you have the same level of consciousness as they, and they reduce their lecture into a kindergarten stage. When a master gives us his or her words, it is not for us to reduce it, or using a crude word, dumb it down so that humanity can understand it. Just deliver the teacher's words. Just deliver the master's words, because those words will speak to the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, intuitional, and soul consciousness of that individual. Until such a time your own energy channels intuitional substance. Okay, back to the notes. If your consciousness is focused on lower planes, rooted in your glamours and illusions, your words will carry low-level force to your audience, a force that will deplete them and will slow them down on the path of their evolution. On the other hand, positive speech and motive carries energy with them into the aura of others. Negative speech and motive wound their aura, such as that young man and that high school counselor. Look at he lost 12 years of his adult life as a result of what that counselor told him. Don't be like that counselor. This is why the wisdom of the ages suggested we stay away from destructive criticism, from gossip, idle speech, and ugly remarks, but instead talk in love, in light, in beauty, in goodness, in deep joy, in enthusiasm. The esoteric wisdom tells us that the kind of energy we transmit to others is the kind of energy with which we have built our own aura. That is why Christ said that the things that go into our mouth do not affect us as much as the words that go out of our mouth. Through every word, we strengthen or weaken our aura, because our words carry into our aura the substance in which our consciousness is focused, and by the motivation in which they are expressed. The Master Djwhal Khul says, speech is one of the keys which open the doors of communication between man and subtler beings. It gives the clue to the discovery of those entities which are contacted on the other side of the veil. But only he who has learned to keep silent and has arrived at the knowledge of the times to speak can pass this veil and make certain creative contacts. Unquote. Wrong speech creates karmic reactions and barriers on our path of initiation. And we are told that no one can proceed on his path of initiation until he eliminates the barriers that he built in his carelessness. Sometimes people will come to me and say, tell me my level of consciousness. They're asking, what initiation am I? 3, 4? All they have to do is pay attention to their speech, to the way they communicate to other people, to the refinement of their physical, emotional, mental bodies, and they have their answer. They don't need somebody else to tell them. We have to eliminate the barriers that we build as a result of our carelessness. And this takes time. Sometimes it only takes a few years. Sometimes it takes incarnations in which many opportunities come and go by to eliminate those barriers. But we miss them in mysterious ways. During the period in which we learn how to keep our tongues under control, as the Tibetan instructed, we master gradually our vanities, our touchiness, our show-offs and fears, and develop discrimination and listening and intuition and strict watchfulness. A conversation that is a lie or based on cruelty, hypocrisy, selfish interest, or insult creates a barrier between ourselves and our vision, between ourselves and our personality and higher realms. All base speech creates in our aura certain crystallizations that decrease our sensitivity. Our sensitivity to subtle impressions, and produce stagnation in which low-level entities can dwell and influence our life. Now, here are the two stories I promised, Tibetan stories. The first one, both of them are about voices, all the voices that we use in our day-to-day speech. Here's the first one. My top voice, said the boy king, is very cultured and polite. It serves to hide the sensitivities that I need to protect. This voice keeps the silence secret, screens my meditating self from the petty and persistent interruptions of curiosity seekers. My lower voice has to do with the powerful bottom desires and the private urges to become a bodhisattva. And the second one. A great one was talking to the Dalai Lama. This is not the Dalai Lama that we all know and love in today's society. This is a Dalai Lama from the past. A great one was talking to the Dalai Lama and had asked him to say something funny. The Dalai Lama was embarrassed. He could not think of a single funny story to tell the great one. The great one told the Dalai Lama, just relax. He said, I've been laughing ever since you came in. So much of what you talk about is pure clowning. I know that one of your voices is down in the chapel talking to God. But the louder one is up here on the roof playing games with virtuoso religious ideas and amusing itself with psychological analysis of its ambiguous self. I know that your voice of voices cares only to keep the seasons changing and the faces or voices it has, but only for the continuing beauty of the cosmos. But unless you perfect your style, few people will hear this voice. Try on all the masks you like. Speak in as many voices as you can. Someday you will be able to carry on 10 conversations at once, just as I do. Then you can come up here all alone and we can talk face to face, voice to voice, one to one, a single presence with nothing to hide. It came to the Dalai Lama that a single voice can be heard in 10 different ways when it responds to 10 different conditions. And he remembered once when the spirit of a famous guru appeared to heal a small discordant community of monks. All the monks had seen the spirit come out of the wall long enough to utter just one word. But each monk had heard a different word. The event is immortalized in this poem. The one who wanted to die heard live. The one who wanted to live heard die. The one who wanted to take heard give. The one who wanted to give heard keep. The one who is always alert heard sleep. The one who was always asleep heard wake. The one who wanted to leave heard stay. The one who wanted to stay heard depart. The one who never spoke heard preach. The one who always preached heard pray. Each one learned how he had been in someone else's way. Those who speak about light and pure reason bring into their personality vehicles intuitional substance, Buddhic substance, and cause a great transformation in the fourth ether of their etheric body. When they speak about the divine plan and purpose, they sublimate the third ether because their speech channels the fires of the atmic plane. When they speak about the divine will, they bring in the fires of the monadic plane into the second plane of the etheric body. And when they speak about the one life, they bring the fires of the divine plane and transform the first etheric plane. Thus, through right speech, the whole of our etheric body is sublimated and replaced by the higher cosmic ethers, which are the gates of the corresponding spheres where dwell and work higher fires that carry the purpose of the almighty life on our planet. Thus, the words of our true self, charged by the electricity of goodness and beauty and truth, make us a living fire, a fountain of inspiration for humanity. Our aura is polluted when we dump into it our doubts and hatred and jealousies and fears and separative thoughts. Such forces are emanations existing in our aura or within our astral and lower mental spheres. Our negative speech carries them out, and as they pass through our aura, they contaminate our vehicles and harm other human beings. Pollution in our astral and mental vehicles invite undesirable entities into our aura who eventually settle themselves and control our conversation. I'm going to reread this, even though we're going to run over a little bit this morning. Pollution in our astral and mental vehicles invites undesirable entities into our aura who eventually settle themselves and control our conversation. Thus, somebody saying, I can't help myself. It is very interesting that for a long time, some people masquerade the teaching of the great ones to trap the minds of the indiscriminate public. Once caught in their trap, the public falls into the glamour and illusions of such people. It is through such a method that thousands of well-meaning aspirants are delayed on their path of progress. Not only aspirants, but even an average person must be careful not to loan his throat center to those who want to occupy them and create confusion and complications in their lives. That is why every word that we utter must be released under our watchful attention. If we see that we are talking without our own will and are carried away by a force that is within us, we must immediately stop our conversation and check the source. We read in Agni Yoga, let us practice severe discipline of speech. Let us consider every word and remember that the consequences of a word cannot be destroyed even by an arhat. This is true for a temple, for a group, or for an individual. For example, in a temple, you have an aura that is stable, intense, and peaceful, and inspiring, and uplifting, and enlightening. Solemnity is like a divine presence dominating there. The sphere of solemnity is affected by noise, by loud speech, by silly jokes, ugly expressions, by clapping of hands, or by making jerky movements. Remember back in the day, in the old days of going to church, there is no clapping. There is no loud jazzy music with religious words. We didn't have 10 and 20,000 people attending our church that needed to be entertained. Things are changing. But we know the value of higher energy, and that solemnity channels higher energy. The shattering of the aura can continue when, through jerky movement and hand clapping, people induce various kinds of emotion into the aura, and thus post-hypnotic suggestion. The solemnity and dignity of the temple or ashram must be kept by all means.